The Galactic Defense Academy floated in the darkness of space like a silver ring wrapped around a dying star. And inside its polished halls, 200 young cadets from 12 different species gathered in the main auditorium for what they believed would be another boring lecture. Cadet Vexnar shifted his scaled body in the uncomfortable seat and looked around at his fellow students with mild amusement, his yellow eyes scanning the diverse crowd of future soldiers and officers who had come from every corner of the galaxy to train together. "What species are we studying today?" asked Alice, the tall insectoid cadet sitting beside him, her compound eyes reflecting the dim lights of the auditorium in dozens of tiny fragments. Vexner checked his datapad and let out a rumbling laugh that echoed off the walls. "Humans," he said with obvious contempt. "We are wasting our time studying humans." Across the aisle, a feline cadet named Corin flicked her ears in agreement, her golden fur rippling as she stretched her powerful limbs. "My grandmother told me about humans," she said with a yawn that revealed rows of sharp teeth. "They are small and soft, and they break easily." "I heard they cannot even see in the dark," added Yira, a small avian cadet whose feathers were a pale shade of blue. "And they have no claws or fangs or venom." The cadets around them murmured in agreement, and the general mood in the room was one of bored dismissal as they waited for the instructor to arrive and get this pointless session over with. Vexna came from the Torvian species, a race of scaled warriors who had conquered 3 star systems before joining the Galactic Compact, and he could not understand why the Academy would waste valuable training time on such an insignificant species. "Humans live on a single planet," he said to his companions. "They only joined the Compact 30 years ago, and they have contributed nothing of importance to galactic civilization." Thalis clicked her mandibles in what passed for laughter among her kind. "Perhaps they will teach us how to be afraid of our own shadows," she joked. And the cadets around her snickered at the comment. The doors at the front of the auditorium slid open with a soft hiss, and Instructor Dorvax entered the room with heavy footsteps that silenced the chatter almost immediately. Dorvax was an older Torvian. His scales faded to a dull gray from age, and his body covered in scars that told stories of countless battles. And he commanded respect simply by existing in a space. "Cadets," he said in a voice like grinding stones, "today we begin your species threat assessment training with a focus on humanity." "Aka!" Few cadets in the back rows exchanged amused glances, but Dorvax did not seem to notice or care about their reaction. "Before we begin," the instructor continued, "I must inform you that the following footage is unedited and classified at the highest levels of Galactic Council security." This caught the attention of several cadets who sat up straighter in their seats. Suddenly curious about what could possibly be classified about such a weak species, Vexna raised his hand. "Instructor, with respect, why would footage of humans require such high classification?" Dorvax turned his ancient eyes toward the young cadet, and for a moment something flickered in those depths that looked almost like fear. "You will understand soon enough," he said simply. "Additionally," Dorvax continued, "viewing this material is mandatory for all military personnel, but cadets may leave the room if they experience psychological distress during the presentation." Laughter rippled through the auditorium at this statement, and Corin leaned over to whisper to Vexnar, "Psychological distress from watching humans? What are they going to do? Bore us to death?" Even Yura, normally the most timid of the group, seemed amused by the warning, her feathers puffing up slightly as she chirped with humor. Instructor Dorvax waited for the laughter to die down, his expression unchanged and his posture rigid. And when silence finally returned to the room, he spoke again in a tone that made several cadets uncomfortable. "I have given this presentation 47 times," he said slowly, "and I have never once made it through without losing cadets to the exits." The amusement faded from the room as cadets looked at each other with uncertainty, wondering what could possibly cause trained military students to flee from a simple video presentation. Phyllis leaned closer to Vexnar, her antennae twitching nervously. "He's trying to scare us," she whispered. "This is some kind of test." Vexnar nodded in agreement, but he could not shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the old instructor was not playing games with them. Dorvax moved to the control panel at the front of the room and began entering commands. "What you are about to see is why the Galactic Council fears humanity more than any other species in the known universe." "Fears them?" Curran said out loud, unable to contain her disbelief. "My species could kill a human with a single strike of our claws." The instructor paused and looked at her with something that might have been pity. "Yes," he said quietly. "You could kill one human, perhaps even 2 or 3, but then their friends would come for you." He pressed a final button and the lights in the auditorium dimmed until only the massive screen at the front remained visible, glowing with a soft blue light. "Humans have a concept they call vengeance," Dorvax said as he moved to stand at the side of the room. "They do not forgive and they do not forget, and they will chase an enemy across the entire galaxy if necessary." The screen flickered and a title card appeared in stark white letters against a black background. And as the cadets read the words, the first real silence of the day fell over the auditorium. "Battle of Sigma Outpost." Vexnar read aloud, his voice suddenly uncertain. "Human Defense Force engagement." The next line made his scale shift to a paler shade, a sign of distress in his species that he could not control. "Casualties." Thalas read in a hollow voice. 12 humans versus 3,400 Kreth raiders. Corin's fur stood on end as she processed the numbers. "That must be a mistake," she said. 12 against thousands? That is not a battle. That is a massacre. Instructor Dorvax spoke from the shadows at the side of the room, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "It was indeed a massacre," he confirmed, "but not in the way you expect." The video began to play, and on the screen appeared a small human outpost built into the rocky surface of a barren moon, with 12 figures in combat armor preparing defensive positions as a massive Kreth warship descended from the sky. The Kreth are known throughout the galaxy as one of the most brutal and effective raiding species in existence, Dorvax narrated. They have destroyed civilizations and enslaved billions. Yura's feathers pressed flat against her body in fear at the mention of the Kreth, a species that even her warrior race elders spoke of with dread. Those 12 humans knew what was coming, Dorvax continued. They sent a distress signal that would take 19 hours to reach the nearest friendly forces, and they knew no help would arrive in time. On the screen, the cargo doors of the Kreth ship opened and hundreds of armored raiders began pouring out onto the moon's surface, their weapons gleaming in the harsh light. "They could have surrendered," the instructor said. "The Kreth would have killed them quickly if they had." Vexnar watched as the 12 tiny human figures raised their weapons and opened fire on the approaching horde, and he felt something cold settle in his stomach. "But humans do not surrender," Dorvax said, and his words hung in the air like a death sentence. "They never surrender." The footage played on the massive screen, and the cadets watched in stunned silence as the 12 human soldiers took their positions behind makeshift barriers of rock and metal. Vexnar had seen Kreth raiders before in training simulations, towering creatures covered in thick armor, plating with 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws. And he knew that a single Kreth could kill most species in seconds. The first wave of raiders crashed against the human defensive line like a tide of death, and the cadets expected to see the small defenders torn apart in moments, but that did not happen. The humans fired their weapons with mechanical precision, each shot finding its target, and Kreth warriors fell by the dozens as they tried to close the distance. Their weapons are not special. Instructor Dorvax noted from the shadows. Standard plasma rifles available to any species in the compact. Thalas leaned forward in her seat, her compound eyes fixed on the screen as she tried to understand what she was seeing. And how are they doing this? She asked. Watch closely, was the only answer Dorvax gave. A Kreth raider broke through the line and slammed into one of the human soldiers. A female whose name tag read Martinez, and its claws tore into her shoulder with enough force to rip through her armor. The cadets expected her to fall, to scream, to die like any reasonable creature would when suffering such a wound instead. Sergeant Lisa Martinez grabbed the blade still embedded in her flesh, pulled it free with her bare hand, and used it to stab the Kreth through its eye before returning to her firing position. Corin made a sound of pure horror, a predator instinct screaming that what she had just witnessed was impossible. Should be in shock, Ira whispered, her feathers trembling. She should be dying. Humans have a biological response they call adrenaline, Dorvax explained. When threatened, their bodies flood with chemicals that suppress pain and increase strength and speed. On screen, the battle continued, and the cadets watched as humans took wounds that should have been fatal and kept fighting as if nothing had happened. One soldier had his leg torn open to the bone, and he simply tied a piece of cloth around it before continuing to shoot, his face showing nothing but cold determination. Another human was thrown against a rock wall hard enough to crack the stone, and she got back up within seconds, spitting blood and raising her weapon. This is not possible, Vexinar said, his voice barely above a whisper. No species can do this, and yet you see it with your own eyes, Dorvax replied. The footage showed the battle stretching on for hours, and the 12 humans rotated positions, covered each other, shared ammunition, and never once showed any sign of breaking. Kreth bodies piled up around their position in mountains of dead flesh. And still the raiders kept coming, unable to believe that such small creatures could stand against them by the 10th hour of fighting. Corin had tears streaming down her furred cheeks, though she did not seem to be aware of them by the 15th hour. Thalas had stopped clicking her mandibles entirely, sitting in perfect stillness like a statue of horror by the 19th hour. When rescue ships finally appeared in the sky, only 4 of the 12 humans remained standing, and they were standing on a field of 3,400 Kreth corpses. The footage showed Captain Kevin Brooks, the commanding officer of the small unit, covered in so much blood that his original armor color was impossible to determine. He stood over the last living Kreth raider, a wounded creature trying to crawl away from the battlefield, and the cadets watched as he lowered his weapon. Surrender, Brooks said on the recording, his voice rough from hours of combat. And you will receive medical care. The Kreth raider lunged at him with its remaining strength, claws aimed at his throat, and Brooks killed it with a single shot without changing his expression. He offered mercy, Vexinar said in disbelief. After everything they did, he offered mercy. Humans always offer mercy first, Dorvax said. It is when the mercy is rejected that they become truly dangerous. The recording ended and the lights in the auditorium rose slightly, revealing the faces of 200 cadets in various states of shock and distress. Ira was shaking so badly that her feathers were falling out, small blue wisps drifting to the floor around her seat. Several cadets in the back rows had their heads between their knees. Trying not to be sick, a Sundari cadet near the exit door stood up on trembling legs. I need to leave, she said. And Dorvax nodded his permission. She was followed by 3 others, then 5 more. And soon a steady stream of cadets was filing out of the auditorium with haunted expressions. Corin remained in her seat, staring at the now dark screen. We call ourselves predators, she said to no one in particular. We are not predators. Vexinar could not find words to respond, his mind still trying to process what he had witnessed. Thalas finally spoke. her voice carrying the hollow tone of someone whose entire worldview had just been shattered. "Instructor, you said that was a minor skirmish in human terms." "I did," Dorvax confirmed. "Then what do they consider a real war?" The old Torvian moved to the control panel again, his scarred hands working the controls with practiced efficiency. "The next footage will show you," he said. "This content is from human history, from their own planet. Before they ever reached the stars, they fought wars before they met other species?" Corin asked. "Humans have been fighting wars for their entire existence as a species," Dorvax said. "They fought each other for thousands of years before they knew we existed." The screen flickered back to life, and the cadets who remained saw images of a blue and green planet covered in clouds, beautiful and peaceful from a distance. "This is Earth," Dorvax said. "The human homeworld, and the most dangerous planet in the known galaxy." Text appeared on screen. Statistics and numbers that made no sense to the cadets at first, in a conflict they called World War II, which lasted only 6 years. Humans killed approximately 70 million of their own kind. The number hung in the air like poison gas. And several more cadets rose to leave. 70 million? Thalis repeated, her voice cracking. "In 6 years?" "That was not even their deadliest period," Dorvax said. "Merely the most well-documented." The footage began, showing human soldiers fighting in trenches filled with mud and death, charging across open fields into walls of gunfire, and dying by the thousands for patches of ground no larger than this auditorium. "Why?" Yura asked, her voice small and frightened. "Why would they do this to each other?" Instructor Dorvax turned to face the remaining cadets, his ancient eyes filled with a weight that came from understanding something terrible. "Because humans are not prey animals who fight only when cornered," he said slowly. "They are persistent predators, and they will pursue their enemies across any distance and any time." He gestured at the screen where human soldiers continued their endless slaughter. "And when they could not find enemies among the stars, they made enemies of each other. Because humans cannot exist without something to fight." The footage showed a human city reduced to rubble, with soldiers picking their way through the destruction, still fighting, still killing, still refusing to stop. "They do not know how to surrender," Dorvax said. "It is not in their nature." The footage of Earth's wars continued to play across the massive screen. And with each passing minute, more cadets abandoned their seats and fled toward the exits. Vexna watched human soldiers fighting in frozen wastelands where the cold alone should have killed them. Yet they kept advancing through snow that reached their waists. Watched them fight in jungles so dense that visibility dropped to mere feet, where poisonous creatures and disease claimed as many lives as enemy weapons. He watched them fight in deserts where the heat could melt metal, in cities reduced to skeletons of broken buildings, and in the skies above clouds where the air itself was too thin to breathe. "They fight everywhere," Thalis said, her voice carrying a tone of horrified fascination. "There is no environment they cannot turn into a battlefield." Instructor Dorvax nodded slowly. "Humans evolved on a planet that was actively trying to kill them at every moment," he explained. "They developed the ability to adapt to any condition because survival demanded it." The screen showed footage of human soldiers swimming across rivers under enemy fire, climbing mountain faces with weapons strapped to their backs, and crawling through underground tunnels barely wide enough to fit their bodies. Their homeworld has extreme temperatures, natural disasters, predatory animals, poisonous plants, and diseases that would wipe out most species, Dorvax continued. And humans conquered all of it. Corinne had stopped crying, but her fur remained standing on end, a visible sign of the primal fear coursing through her body. "My species considers ourselves apex predators," she said quietly. "We were wrong." The footage shifted to show something different. And at first, the cadets did not understand what they were seeing. A human soldier in medical gear was running across an open field while explosions erupted around her, heading directly toward a group of wounded soldiers lying in the dirt. "This is Amy Turner," Dorvax narrated, "a human medic during a conflict on one of their colony worlds." The cadets watched as the small human woman reached the wounded and began treating them under fire, her hands moving with practiced speed as she worked to save lives. "She is running toward danger," Ira observed, her avian brain struggling to comprehend such behavior. Why would she run toward danger? Because other humans needed help, Dorvax said simply. The footage showed Amy Turner dragging wounded soldiers one by one to safety, making trip after trip across that deadly open ground while weapons fire struck the earth around her on her fourth trip. She was hit in the leg by shrapnel and went down hard, and the cadets assumed she was finished, but Amy Turner wrapped a bandage around her bleeding leg with one hand while continuing to treat a wounded soldier with the other. And then she got back up and made 2 more trips before she finally collapsed from blood loss. "She saved 11 lives that day," Dorvax said, "and she received a medal for her actions, which humans consider a great honor." Vexanar shook his head in disbelief. "She nearly killed herself to save others," he said. "That is not logical behavior." "No," Dorvax agreed. "It is not logical, but it is very human." The footage changed again, showing a different type of scene that made the remaining cadets lean forward in their seats. A human soldier was standing in the middle of a group of his comrades when an explosive device landed among them, a small cylinder that would detonate in seconds and kill everyone nearby. The cadets watched as the soldier looked at the device, then looked at his friends, and then threw himself on top of the explosive and curled his body around it. The detonation killed him instantly, but his body absorbed enough of the blast to save the 6 soldiers around him. "Humans call this sacrifice," Dorvax said into the stunned silence that followed. "They consider it the highest form of honor to die so that others may live." Talus made a sound that was half sob and half scream, her insectoid body trembling as her mind tried to reject what she had just witnessed. "They choose death," she said. "They willingly choose death, not for themselves," Corin corrected her, speaking slowly as understanding dawned in her predator eyes. "They choose death to protect their pack." 20 more cadets left the auditorium during the next few minutes, unable to continue watching. Of the original 200, barely half remained, and many of those who stayed did so only because they were too shocked to move. A Dorvax paused the footage and allowed the lights to rise slightly, giving the traumatized students a moment to collect themselves. "You have seen humans fight against overwhelming odds," he said. "You have seen them endure pain that would kill most species, and you have seen them sacrifice themselves for each other." He walked slowly across the front of the auditorium, his old bones creaking with each step. "But you have not yet seen what happens when humans fight to protect something precious." Vexanar felt his scales shift again, going even paler than before. What could be more intense than what we have already witnessed? Dorvax stopped walking and turned to face the cadets, and for the first time his expression showed something other than calm professionalism. He looked afraid. "The next footage is from an incident we call the Nexer event," he said. "It occurred 12 years ago when a human colony ship was attacked by Nexer slavers." Several cadets gasped at the mention of the Nexer, a species known for capturing other beings and forcing them to work in brutal labor camps until they died from exhaustion. "The ship was called the Starward Hope," Dorvax continued, "and it carried 2,000 human civilians, including 400 children." Corinne's claws extended involuntarily, digging into the armrests of her seat. "Children?" she repeated. "Yes," Dorvax said. "And what you are about to see is what happens when humans believe their children are in danger." He moved back to the control panel, his movements slower than before, as if he was dreading what came next. "I must warn you," he said, without looking at the cadets. This footage has caused permanent psychological trauma in some viewers, and the Galactic Council considered classifying it so highly that even military personnel would be forbidden from seeing it. Why did they not? Thales Asketervax finally turned around, and the fear in his eyes was unmistakable now. Because the Council decided that every soldier in the galaxy needs to understand exactly what will happen if they ever threaten a human child. He pressed the button, and the lights went completely dark, leaving only the glow of the screen. The Nexer sent 600 warriors to capture that ship, Dorvac said as the footage began to load. They were considered elite soldiers, the best their species had to offer. The title card appeared on screen. Nexer event, internal security recording, classified. The Starboard Hope had only 47 security personnel aboard. Dorvax finished. "What you are about to see is not a battle." The footage began, showing the interior of a civilian vessel filled with families going about their daily lives. It is an extermination. The footage showed the interior of the Starboard Hope in the moments before the attack. Families eating meals together in the common areas, children playing games in the corridors, and couples walking hand in hand through the observation decks. It looked peaceful and safe. A small community floating through the stars toward a new home on a distant colony. World. Then the alarms began to wail. The cadets watched as the civilians looked up in confusion, their faces shifting from calm to fear in the span of seconds as announcements blared through the ship's speakers. "Attention all passengers. This is Captain Rodriguez. We are being boarded by hostile forces. All civilians proceed to designated safe zones immediately." This is not a drill. Chaos erupted on the screen as families grabbed their children and ran toward the interior of the ship, their screams mixing with the wailing of the alarms. The 47 security personnel appeared on screen, moving against the flow of fleeing civilians, heading toward the outer airlocks where the Nexer boarding craft were attaching to the hull. "Watch what happens next," Instructor Dorvax said quietly. The security team reached the main airlock just as it was breached, and the first Nexer warrior stepped through into the human vessel. Nexer were nightmares given physical form. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, with bodies covered in chitinous armor and faces that were nothing but clusters of black eyes. Above razor-filled mouths, the lead security officer, a middle-aged man with gray hair and a calm expression, raised his weapon and fired 3 shots into the first boarder before it could take a second step. They did not hesitate, Delis observed, a voice hollow. "Humans never hesitate when their families are at stake." Dorvax replied. The battle at the airlock was brutal and brief, with the security team holding the choke point while civilians continued to evacuate behind them. But there were too many airlocks and too few defenders, and soon the Nexer were pouring into the ship from multiple entry points. The footage switched to a different camera, showing the cargo bay at the center of the vessel, where all 400 children had been gathered and sealed. Inside, parents stood outside the sealed doors, many of them crying as they said goodbye to their children through the thick metal. "Why are they not going inside with them?" Yira asked, her feathers pressed so flat against her body that she looked half her normal size, because they knew the Nexer would try to break through those doors. Vexinar answered, understanding dawning in his mind. "The parents are going to fight." The footage confirmed his words as civilian after civilian picked up anything that could be used as a weapon and formed lines in the corridors, leading to the cargo bay. Maintenance workers with heavy wrenches, cooks with kitchen knives, teachers with nothing but their bare hands and their rage. "These are not soldiers," Corin whispered. "These are ordinary people." "There is no such thing as an ordinary human," Dorvax said. "Not when their children are in danger." The Nexer found them soon enough. Waves of armored warriors surging through the corridors toward the cargo bay and the prize they sought. What followed made the Battle of Sigma Outpost look like a minor disagreement day. Human father with no combat training tackled the lead Nexar warrior and beat it to death with a fire extinguisher, taking 4 wounds that would have killed a Torvian before he finally fell. A human mother who had been a librarian before boarding the ship jammed a broken piece of metal through a Nexar's eye cluster and kept stabbing even after the creature's claws had opened her stomach. An elderly human grandmother led a group of Nexar into an airlock by pretending to flee, and when they followed her inside, she triggered the emergency release and blew herself and all 12 of them into the vacuum of space. The cadets in the auditorium began leaving in groups of 5 and 6. Unable to watch any more, Vexnar heard someone vomiting in the rows behind him, but he could not look away from the screen. The security team had been reduced to 15 survivors, then 10, then 8, and they fell back to the cargo bay doors, where they made their final stand. Captain Kevin Brooks appeared on screen. The same man from the Sigma outpost footage, older now and covered in wounds that should have dropped him hours ago. "They will not get these children," he said to his remaining soldiers, his voice clear and steady despite the blood pouring from a gash on his forehead. "Not one child, not ever." The Nexar came in force, all their remaining warriors converging on that single point, and the 8 humans met them with a fury that the cadets had never imagined possible. Corinne was sobbing openly now, her predator pride completely forgotten as she watched a species she had dismissed as weak fight with a episode of savagery that exceeded anything her own people could manage. A human soldier with both arms broken picked up a weapon with his teeth and kept firing. Another soldier whose legs had been torn off dragged himself forward with his vase hands to tackle a Nexar that was getting too close to the door. The fighting went on for 2 more hours, an eternity of blood and screaming and death that the security cameras recorded without emotion. When the rescue ships finally arrived and forced their way aboard, they found the cargo bay doors still sealed and intact. Behind those doors, 400 children waited in silence, some crying, some praying. All of them alive. In front of those doors lay the bodies of 600 Nexar warriors. Every single one of them dead. 19 humans had survived, all of them wounded beyond what medical science should have been able to repair. And yet, every one of them was still conscious and still holding a weapon. The footage ended, and the lights in the auditorium rose to full brightness, revealing a room that was more than half empty. Vexnar counted the remaining cadets and felt something cold settle in his stomach when he realized that only 94 of the original 200 were still present. 106 cadets have left, Dorvax announced, confirming what Vexnar had already calculated. That is roughly consistent with previous presentations. Corinne raised her tear-stained face and looked at the instructor with eyes that had lost all their predatory confidence. "How?" she asked simply. "How can any species do what we just witnessed?" Dorvax was silent for a long moment before answering. "The Galactic Council asked the same question," he said. "They brought in scientists from every species to study human biology and psychology." He walked slowly to the center of the stage, his whole body seeming even more tired than before. "The scientists discovered that humans have an evolutionary trait that no other species possesses." "What trait?" Talus asked. "When humans believe that something they love is in danger," Dorvax said, "their brains shut off the parts responsible for self-preservation. Fear and pain." He let that statement hang in the air for a moment. "They literally become incapable of giving up, incapable of surrendering, incapable of dying until the threat is eliminated or their bodies physically stop functioning." Yura made a small sound of terror. "They become monsters." "No," Vexnar said quietly, surprising himself with his own words. "They become parents." Dorvax looked at the young Torvian with something that might have been approval. "Tomorrow we will discuss what this means for galactic relations with humanity," he said. "But for now, there is someone who wishes to speak with you." The door at the side of the auditorium opened, and a human walked in. The remaining cadets pressed back in their seats with visible fear. And Vexenar felt his heart racing as the creature from the footage approached them in the flesh. The human who entered the auditorium was not what the cadets had expected after watching hours of warfare, and Slaughter Commander Danny Cole was a man of average height with kind eyes and a gentle smile, wearing a simple uniform without any of the weapons or armor they had seen in the footage. He walked with an easy confidence that seemed completely at odds with the terror they had just witnessed. And when he reached the front of the room, he looked out at the frightened faces of the remaining cadets with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "Good afternoon," he said in a voice that was soft and friendly. "My name is Danny Cole, and I am the human military liaison assigned to this academy." Nobody responded, and several cadets were visibly trembling in their seats. Cole seemed to notice their fear, and his smile became a little sad. "I know what you just watched," he said, "and I understand why you are afraid of me." Vexenar found his voice first, though it came out weaker than he intended. "You are the same species as the people in those recordings." "I am," Cole agreed without hesitation. "Every human alive carries the same potential you saw in that footage." Corin's claws were still extended, her predator instincts screaming at her to either attack or flee. "Then how can you stand there and smile at us?" The human walked closer to the cadets, and several of them pressed deeper into their seats, trying to put distance between themselves and this creature. "Because violence is not what defines us," Cole said gently. "It is simply one tool among many, and we prefer not to use it." He pulled a small cloth from his pocket and walked directly to Corinne, who flinched as if expecting an attack. Instead, Cole simply offered her the cloth. "For your tears," he said kindly. "It is called a handkerchief." Corinne stared at the offered cloth as if it might bite her, but after a moment she reached out with trembling paws and took it. "Thank you," she whispered, and the words seemed to cost her something. Cole nodded and stepped back, giving the cadet space. "I want you to understand something very important," he said, addressing all of them now. "Everything you saw in that footage is true. Humans are capable of incredible violence when pushed." He paused, making sure he had their attention. "But what you did not see in that footage is also true." Valis clicked her mandibles uncertainly. "What do you mean?" "You saw humans fighting to protect their children," Cole said, "but you did not see what happens after the fighting ends." He gestured at the blank screen. "After the Nexer event, human ships spent 3 months searching for any survivors from the enemy vessels, not to kill them, but to offer them medical care." The cadets exchanged confused glances. "You saw footage of human wars on Earth," Cole continued, "but you did not see the treaties that ended those wars, the reconciliation between former enemies, the forgiveness that allowed civilizations to rebuild together." Vexenar leaned forward, suddenly desperate to understand. "How can you forgive enemies who tried to kill your children?" "It is difficult," Cole admitted. "Perhaps the hardest thing humans ever do, but we believe that peace is more valuable than vengeance." He walked back to the center of the stage, his movements calm and non-threatening. "We have a saying on Earth, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind," meaning that if we never stop seeking revenge, eventually everyone loses. "But you never surrender," Yura pointed out, her small voice carrying surprising strength. The instructor said humans never surrender. "That is correct," Cole said. "We do not surrender when we are fighting to protect something precious. But we also do not continue fighting once the threat is eliminated." He smiled again, and this time the expression reached his eyes. "The same instinct that makes us dangerous in war makes us loyal in peace. When a human calls you friend, they mean it with their entire being." Corinne was wiping her eyes with the handkerchief, her fear slowly transforming into something else. "You would fight for us?" she asked. "Species you barely know?" "If you were threatened and could not protect yourselves." "Yes," Cole said without hesitation. Humans have died for allies they met only days before. It is part of who we are. Instructor Dorvax stepped forward, his ancient face showing an expression the cadets had never seen before. Commander Cole served in the Nexer event, he said quietly. He was one of the 19 survivors. The cadets looked at the friendly human with new eyes. Searching for signs of the warrior they had seen in the footage, Cole lifted his sleeve slightly, revealing scars that ran up his forearm in jagged lines. I was 22 years old, he said, and I was more afraid than I had ever been in my life. But you fought anyway. Vexinar said, I fought because there were children behind me who could not fight for themselves. Cole replied, fear does not stop humans. It simply makes us more determined. He let his sleeve fall back into place and looked out at the remaining cadets. I know that more than half your classmates left this room today, and I suspect many of them will withdraw from the academy entirely. Corin nodded slowly. After what we saw, I understand why. But you stayed, Cole said, pointing at each of them in turn. All of you stayed, and that tells me something important about your character. Talis straightened in her seat slightly. What does it tell you? That you want to understand, Cole said. Not just fear us, but truly understand what we are and why. He stepped closer to them again. And this time nobody flinched away. Humans are not monsters. We are guardians who learn to become monsters when necessary. And we carry that burden every day of our lives. The guilt. Vexinar said suddenly, remembering something Dorvax had mentioned. You feel guilt for what you are capable of doing. Constantly. Cole confirmed. Every human who has taken a life in defense of others carries that weight forever. We do not celebrate violence. We endure it. The room fell silent as the cadets processed this new information. Trying to reconcile the terrifying footage with the gentle man standing before them, finally, Corinne spoke, her voice steady for the first time since the footage began. I understand now why the council fears you. Cole tilted his head curiously. Why do you think that is? Not because you can destroy us, Corinne said slowly, working through the thought as she spoke, but because if we became your friends, you would destroy yourselves to save us. The human smiled, and for a moment, the cadet saw something ancient and knowing in his eyes. That is exactly right, and we would never be worthy of that sacrifice. Corin finished quietly. Cole shook his head gently. Every being is worthy of protection. That is what we believe. You do not need to earn safety. It is a right. 1 week later, the Academy released its updated roster of the 200 cadets who had attended the Species Threat Assessment course on humanity. 106 had withdrawn from the program entirely. The remaining 94 had all submitted requests for additional training in human culture, human history, and human diplomatic relations. Vexinar sat in the Academy library, surrounded by books and datapads filled with information about Earth and its people. He read about humans saving alien refugees from war zones, adopting orphans from species they had never encountered before, and dying to protect planets that were not their own. He read about human artists and poets, about their music and their stories, about the way they loved with the same intensity that they fought. And when Corin sat down beside him, her golden fur now lying flat and calm, he looked up and met her eyes. They are not what I expected, she said simply. No, Vexinar agreed, closing the book in his hands. They are not monsters. He thought about Commander Cole and his gentle smile, about the scars hidden beneath his sleeves, about the weight of guilt that all humans carried for the violence they were capable of. They are guardians, Vexinar said finally. Guardians who have learned to become monsters when they must be. Corin nodded, and they sat together in silence for a long moment before she spoke again. I want to be worthy of their friendship, she said quietly. I want to be the kind of ally that a human would fight for. Vexinar looked at her and saw the same determination in her eyes that he felt in his own hearts. Then we will learn, he said. We will learn to be worthy. Outside the library windows, the stars stretched out in endless patterns of light, And somewhere among them was a small blue planet that had produced the most terrifying and most compassionate species the galaxy had ever known. And for the first time since watching that footage, Vexenar felt something other than fear when he thought about humanity. He felt hope.